Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining tonight's webinar, Resume Equals Personal Brand, How to Get It Right, with our very own Laura Hill, Senior Resume Writer at Ivy Exec. Laura's career experience includes an 8-year banking career with JPM Chase, an executive search with Korn, Ferry International and Redwood Partners. She also has 10 years as a career outplacement coach, and she's actually heading client services. She also headed client services for boutique outplacement firm Crenshaw Associates. She received her MBA in finance from NYU Stern and undergrad in marketing from University of Texas McCombs. As you see here, she also has a lot of media mentions, and from Wall Street Journal to Forbes. She has been very widely regarded in the industry and also followed in the media. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Laura, and we can get started.
Thank you, Mache. I'm very pleased to be here tonight, and I look forward to your questions. You know, when we talk about personal branding, one of the most important tools that we have at our disposal is a resume. And it's a great opportunity in a resume to tell people what we want them to know. So it's a wonderful document. It's important that we all have a good one and that we use it. And I'm very passionate about resumes, as you'll see here in a minute as we talk about it. So as Mache mentioned, we're going to go very quickly through the material because we have a lot to cover in a short time. First, we're going to do just a little bit of background, what might be different for you today versus 5 or 10 years ago when you perhaps last wrote a resume. And we'll talk about trends because there are trends in resumes, just like everything else. We're going to talk about aesthetics and formatting because if it hurts someone's eyes to look at your resume, obviously that bodes poorly for you. We'll talk about the content, a few don'ts, some terminology, and then of course some Q&A. Okay, so what's different today in the resume you might write today as compared to something you might have written 5 to 10 years ago? Well, first of all, you have moved up, right? You were all probably in much more senior level positions than you were a few years ago. And so now your audience for your resume might be CEOs, CFOs, boards of directors, and of course retained search people. And these folks are used to looking at very professional resumes of very senior executives. So your competition is out there with nice, pretty resumes, very impactful with accomplishments. You need to keep up. The bar is obviously higher. And of course, as you progress in your career, your earlier experience is going to shrink, and any redundant experiences will definitely shrink as well. And of course, you want to keep up with the fashions, as we mentioned. Okay, actually, for some reason, this doesn't want to progress the slides. Okay, that'll do it. Background. Purpose of a resume. Your resume is a selling document. So there's also some mindset changes through the years about resumes. Think of it as a marketing brochure. It's okay to exclude information that doesn't make your case for what you're looking to sell. And that said, we don't want to have big gaps in our resume. But particularly for earlier experience that doesn't relate to what you do now, it should be very short. Second purpose of a resume is to match you to a job or a career path. If the reader can't figure out what you do, you've lost the game. And you have to have the keywords that will match you to words that will appear in the kind of job you're going for. It gets you in the door. It may get you an interview. It will not get you the job. Sometimes people will attribute to resumes much greater power than what a resume can do for you. So it cannot help you change careers. You have to figure out how to tell people that, how to navigate that, and work around the resume. Today we're looking for results. And wham factor, and a little less on the details of how you accomplished those things. You're going to talk about that in the interview. We're not looking to account for your time and explain where you've been and what your whereabouts have been for the last 10 or 15 years. Again, that's sort of an old-fashioned way of looking at it. Now, by the way, just a quick aside, some of you may be using resumes for internal company purposes, internal to your company. you probably will want to tone your resume down a little bit from what I'm recommending here. My presentation tonight is very much focused on a resume that's going to be used outside your company for the purpose of vying for or being considered for other positions. So if you're writing a resume for the SEC or for a prospectus for other purposes, that might be a little bit different. Okay, lots of research on the topic of resumes and the way people read resumes. Can you imagine in 4 seconds, most people have formed a pretty strong opinion, 4 seconds of looking at your resume, maybe 10 seconds at most before they decide yes, no, or maybe, and whether they're going to read on or not. Also imagine that the person looking at your resume, if they work in HR or if they're a recruiter, they may have looked at 50 or 60 or 100 resumes that day before your resume comes up on the screen. If they're a hiring manager, they may have been reading other documents all day long, right, at the time that, for whatever reason, they open their email and look at your resume. So we have to assume that there's eye fatigue, and we need to create our resumes around that. They also look for key information in expected places. In that 4 seconds, they don't want to go all around the page to find your employer names, your job titles, and your years of employment. And so by putting those in very specific places, we help the reader grasp what you do in those first 4 to 10 seconds. And what they also want to know is immediately is, what do you do? They need to file you away into a category in their electronic files of where they're going to put your resume, and in their brains, is this a marketing person, is this a finance person, is this a controller, etc. Fashions. Fortunately, fashions and resumes don't change quite as fast as attire, true fashion, but they do change from time to time. And so here in the left column, what's in style today, whoops, go back, is to profile a target audience, to have a target type of job or set of jobs in mind, a target audience in mind, and to be specific in positioning yourself towards that target. The opposite of that, of course, would be trying to be everything to everybody. That is just out of fashion in marketing, and it's certainly out of fashion in resumes. Keyword matching. Whoops, I'll do that again. The keywords that computers now do some matching on, a little less so at the executive levels, but nonetheless, we need to implant the words so they can match you to some jobs. Today, what's in fashion is not very much white space. Back 20 years ago, it was important to have a lot of white space, and so the resumes might go on 3, 4, 5 pages because there was so much white space and big type. Well, today it's all going to go on 1 or 2 pages. Now let's talk about this. Speaking of, when do you need a second page? And there's no hard and fast number about this, but it's a very frequent question. My guideline is 10 to 15 years of experience is usually around the time someone needs a second page. If you have 10 or less years of experience, I strongly recommend you stick with 1 page. And the reason for that is you're going to be vying for positions that call for less than 10 years of experience. And so your competitors will have 1-page resumes. Since most of you on our call tonight have 10 to 20 or 20 plus years of experience, that second page is probably very important to be able to get all of your great information out there. But never ever more than 2 pages today. I have not seen a 3-page resume in at least 5 years. Exceptions, of course, being in academia or where you have an addendum. LinkedIn URL, something new that in the last few years, again, I recommend that you put your LinkedIn URL so that people can find you on LinkedIn. Objective statements. Back in the day, for those of you with more than 20 years of experience, you remember objective statements from the 60s and 70s, probably the 70s, maybe 80s, where we told the reader that your objective was to obtain a position that would be challenging and you could have impact, and stuff that really wasn't very useful to the reader. And unfortunately, objective statements are just out of fashion, so we don't use them, we use profiles instead, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Too many fonts. sizes, graphics, colors, too much bolding. It just really, it can be very annoying for people who are reading lots of resumes in a row. Again, it needs to be very inviting to the eye. Blocks of text, my rule is no more than 3, maybe 4 lines of text that is unbulleted. Again, a resume is a bad place to write a big paragraph. People don't have the time and they're really discouraged from wanting to read anything that's more than 3 lines or so. They also, well, they want to get to your job history very, very quickly. And so I like the profile sections to be very short when we use them, not always, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we don't want a whole lot of text. The reader really wants to get to your current job title very, very quickly without a whole bunch of big page full of stuff ahead of it. And lastly, some of you may have heard of what's called a functional resume. A lot of resume books will recommend that career changers use a functional resume. And what that means is they're going to have a section on maybe management skills, analytical skills, and they're going to talk about all of their capabilities that might be transferable to another field. And then very far down on the page, or maybe on the second page, they'll have a listing, really just a listing of the company names, job titles, and dates where they worked. And what happens with that is because all the professionals know and have experienced career changers who are using a functional format, when they see a functional format, they assume you are a career changer. Otherwise, you'd be telling them right off the bat who you work for and what you do. So it's an immediate ding, it's an immediate red flag, and last time I was a recruiter, I would hit the delete button as fast as I could when I saw a functional resume. So you don't want to have that disturb you. Okay, forgive me, this is rather granular, very detailed, but I think it's very important, and I recommend everyone use what's called a serif, S-E-R-I-F, typeface, as opposed to what's called a sans serif typeface. Garamond, Palatino, Linotype, Cambria, and Times New Roman are all examples of serif typefaces. These numbers here next to it are the font sizes that I recommend, at least as a minimum, that you would use in each of these fonts. So a Times New Roman 10 is different from a Garamond 10. They're actually physically different sizes and therefore different levels of readability. But the serif typeface is what you will see when you pick up any newspaper, and most magazines will use a serif font because they want, again, your eyes to be brought in and very easily read, make it very easy to read the text. The sans serif typefaces, which include like Arial, which is very popular on the internet. I'm actually, the typeface that you're looking at here in this presentation is actually a sans serif. A serif script will have the lines that make up each letter are not uniform in size. Some parts of the line that will make up an A, a B, a C, etc. will be a little thicker. Don't ask me why, something about the way the eyes work that causes that sort of typeface to invite the eye in. I also recommend that you use the same font and same font size throughout your resume. Again, if you throw in different font sizes and different types of scripting and whatnot, I just find it annoying. Maybe that's because I've read so many hundreds or thousands of resumes, and I want something that, again, that's going to be very pleasing to the eye. Also, on the things that you bold or put in all caps, you should be using your bolding especially to bring the reader's eye to something important. So when we bold something that says professional experience, it's sort of a waste of eyeball space. It's a little better to bold, obviously we want to bold your company names, your job titles, and maybe some of the other positioning information. And then, of course, as I said before, blocks of text are really not a good thing on a resume. We're going to pull up some examples here in a minute. We're going to pull up an example of John Doe in 1 second to illustrate what I'm talking about now. The location of the information. I actually mentioned that a few minutes ago. And here is our John Doe resume. And so when I say refer to the standard locations for company name, this is a standard location for a company name. and the job title goes below it. In some cases, as you can see we have on this one, we have a very short little company description. We've told the reader this is a New York Stock Exchange traded company and its ticker symbol. We've described it, it's a $1 billion cosmetics, fragrance, and skincare marketer, in case the reader doesn't know. Also gives the size and scope in terms of the size of the company, the revenue size. And then we want, like I said, we want the job title to be right below that. And then we want our overall dates to be over on the right. I was taught as a recruiter many years ago that one of the first things you do is skim down the right margin, and I can see that this person worked for 7 years at this company, a little short time here for a little startup back in the .com era, and then for 6 prior years worked for a different company in a variety of positions where we've just given the job titles and the locations there. On the dates, many of you have been promoted within your companies, right? So if you have more than one position within your company, you want to put the dates for each position inside, not at the margin over here, but next to the actual job title. See, here we have the prior job and the dates prior. The reason for that is if we put all of those interim dates flush over on the right margin, it disables the reader from being able to see your tenures at each company and could potentially cause them to think you're a job hopper when in fact you've just been promoted many times at your same company. Obviously that's a very different thing than a job hopper. Okay. Education, of course, goes to the bottom, whereas when you were coming out of business school or undergrad or law school or whatever, you put your education at the top. Now, of course, it goes at the bottom. And if you have any community service, professional memberships, publications, speaking engagements, that would be at the very bottom under the education. Okay, targeting your resume. Oftentimes, it's very useful to your objectives to have a profile at the top. And I'm going to show you, this is a whole bunch of examples, different people, different functions. Each of them, as you can see, is not too long. This one here, 3 lines. This one here might take up a little bit more space. None of them take up any more than this amount of space here, our Treasury Executive. That's about as long as I like to see a top section. Several of them have lists. Look at this one here, our Risk Management Executive. In 2 lines, we told the reader everything they need to know before they read this man's resume. That he had substantial, he's a risk management executive with banking, rating agency, and regulatory experience. That was distinctive about him and made him a really interesting candidate because of his varied experience, having worked for the regulators, worked for a bank, and a rating agency. And this line here about strong analytical, interpersonal, and leadership skills, innovative and independent thinker, to be honest, that's a throwaway. We're sort of filling in the line. It does impart some qualitative aspects of your personal brand, so you don't want to just pull a line out of a book that someone thinks it's nice to say. This really should represent you. But to be honest, a recruiter can't do much with that information. The hiring manager can't do much with that information. So what is most useful and most important are these buzzwords. This Treasury Executive knows how to manage funding operations, bank and creditor relations. He knows about commercial paper, master notes, and repos. He knows about asset liability strategy. This is a buzzword. Obviously, you only use buzzwords when you're sure that your target audience will relate to them. And other rather specific things, municipal reinvestment contracts. And so these are things that might appear on a job description for this individual who's a Treasury Executive. As you can see, we've also, in every single example, we have told the reader right away what you do. In this case, and sometimes this happens, we want to highlight a couple different things: marketing, strategy, innovation. They all go together, as you might imagine. This person was in healthcare, so you'll see things that relate to healthcare, patient-centric solutions, things that wouldn't relate, obviously, outside of the healthcare. So let's move on. I think everybody probably has the ideas there. So we want to tell the reader what you do. advertise what you want the reader to know. And by the way, this profile is not a summary. In a summary you might feel compelled to describe many of all the different things that you've done. The point of the profile is to talk about the things you've done that relate directly to what you want to do next. And things you did earlier, just because you did them and they're in your resume, doesn't mean we're going to talk about them in the profile. This is how we position and telegraph to the audience what you're looking to do. Now, the absence of a profile. Actually, here at IB Exec, we do a lot of resumes that don't have a profile at the top. And the reason that's okay is that when someone is not changing careers, they're not looking to segue, and they want to continue on the same career path that they are already on, we don't need to. It's always an option that we can put some branding information out there. But if we decline to put a profile at the top, the reader will read your most recent or current position and assume that that's what you want to do next. At any point where you've done something more recently that is a little different and you want to tell the reader that you really want to go back and do something you did last year or year before last or one job ago, then I would really recommend that you use a profile statement and telegraph that to the audience. Okay, now, Mache, any questions?
Yes, we actually have quite a few, and if you want, you can always make the presentation from the beginning or from current slide, so you can get back into the presentation. And we will definitely be sending the slide deck as well, so in the follow-up email. So don't worry, we'll cover a lot of it there. But it also, so we have some questions. For example, Jasmine asked, why is it important to tone down accomplishments for internal postings?
Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because, you know, it really depends on your corporate culture. Some corporate cultures are much more braggadocious. Others might be much more understated. So I'm really glad you asked that question to clarify because I sort of made a blanket statement about toning it down. When you're new into a company or assimilating, I would look at some precedents, have your boss or a mentor or colleague show you some examples of how the resumes are done internally and try to capture about the same level of salesmanship, if you will.
Perfect. Another question we have is, should position dates include months or just years?
Just years. I'm glad you asked that. For some reason, I have a hypothesis as to the reason. In recent years, I have seen more people using months, but particularly for the experience level of the people on the call today, for experienced executives, it's always years. I think perhaps the reason a lot of people have been putting months because we've had a very dicey economy. I don't have to tell anybody over the last 3 years since 2008, and maybe people are looking to say I wasn't unemployed a whole year, I was unemployed 2 months, and if you put the months in there, you know, it doesn't look, the gap doesn't look as big. I assume that's why people are doing that. I don't know, but stick with the years.
Perfect. And Sunita asked, is it okay to use I in the resume from team worker perspective?
That is a big no-no. Never use I, never use my. You use sort of a third person. And when you look closer at some of the examples, you can see that. So, Machi, I'm going to continue on. I'll come back in a few minutes with some questions. Make sure we don't get too off track here.
Perfect.
As I mentioned before, and I showed you the example, a short company description is very helpful for companies that are not well known. You might want to tell the reader it's a startup, it's a venture-funded startup, private equity-owned company that's been rolled up, things like that. For the job descriptions, so I know I've been preaching here about we don't want to just read your job descriptions, we want to read about your accomplishments. So let's take a quick look at the way I like to do the position, the description of the position. I like to put it unbulleted before the accomplishments are bulleted. As you can see, this is a full 3 lines, and that's actually fairly long. I wouldn't want it to be any longer than this. But what we're doing is giving the scope, the size. This person is saying I have a staff of 300 people, a $27 million budget for the quality control of 23 brands with more than 25,000 SKUs. That's a term in retail. Many of you might know it. Scope of the position spanned a global supply chain of 14 manufacturing plants, 400 suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. So the reader can't help in reading this to understand this is a great big job. And here's the size and scope of it. And then we reserve all these bullet points. Every one of these bullet points is an accomplishment. I'm going to come back and talk about the accomplishments in just a minute. Lately I've been seeing a lot of people use the word direct. Just connotation-wise, it just sounds sort of autocratic. So lead is better, lead or led, past tense. We try to avoid, try not to use responsible for too much because that's going to give me a job description. We really want to know more about what you actually accomplished than what you were supposed to accomplish as per your job title. Okay, let's move to the next slide here. Words, I'll just go through this very, very quickly. We want good, strong words for our verbs. Revamped, championed, led, managed, developed and implemented, turned around. Excellent, obviously. Avoid, weak things, helped, coordinated, assisted, directed, just because it sounds autocratic. And proven track record. I had a client a few weeks ago just insisting we write proven track record. I typed it out, and as soon as I got it typed out, he said, you know, Laura, you're right. It just sounds trite. And it sounds like we pulled it out of the resume writing book. So, accomplishments. Here are some parameters to help you understand what the optimal resume will have for accomplishments. Typically, an accomplishment might be a project that you managed, has a discrete beginning and end, and has some results. And you can talk about the scope, the scale, that it came in on time, under budget, you overcame obstacles, and hopefully some metrics as to the success of the project and the results from the project. It may also, depending on what you do, it may be referring to improvements over time. You know, when you took over the department, there was a 10% error rate on every transaction, on transactions, and you reduced that to a 2% error rate within 6 months. Or your department was able to process so many transactions within the 24-hour turnaround time, and after you made some improvements, the turnaround time was expedited to 4 hours. Okay. At the end of the day, you know, we all work for for-profit businesses. Maybe we have a few not-for-profit people on our call, but most of us work in the private sector. And, you know, at the end of the day, there's only two things that are relevant. Did you help the company make money, either because you sold something or contributed to people in your company who make a sale, or did you reduce expenses? If you're in finance, and if you do reduce risks and reduce errors, by definition that's going to help you make more profits and reduce your expenses and potential losses, right? Some other ways to turn an activity or a statement of something you did into an accomplishment is to say selected. Instead of just saying that you served on a committee for the United Way or some re-engineering committee or something, you were selected, right? You were selected to be on that committee or to lead a team. The first ever can be very powerful of something that you developed that was the first ever. Something that you did that requires some context. The context that for investment people, for example, your portfolio returned a certain return in spite of adverse market conditions, or you were able to raise investment funds in spite of an adverse fundraising environment. Obviously, the metrics, when you have them, are absolutely the best. You grew revenues or you increased sales by a certain %, or that you actually increased them from 1 million to 5 million, where you use absolute numbers. Obviously, if you're going to put numbers in your resume, you have to feel comfortable and make sure that your company, that those are publicly available numbers. If your company does not make certain numbers available, you want to be probably careful as to what numbers that you use. Now, here's the biggest tip. So everybody listen up. If you were nodding off, this is a good time to listen. To convert many of the things that people start with on their resumes into an accomplishment, I look for statements that say to. We installed a system to improve our processing time. Basically what you've told the reader is why you did the project and what the project was supposed to accomplish. It was supposed to process more transactions faster or whatever. That tells me what you were supposed to do. It doesn't tell me if you actually accomplished that. So if we flip that to past tense, and instead of the to, we change the to that improved, and we're now making it into a statement of fact of what actually occurred. You installed a new SAP system that improved turnaround time from 4 weeks to 2 weeks in closing the quarterly books. And now we have an accomplishment statement versus a hypothetical statement of what you were intending to do. I'm going to show you, Maciej, I'll take any questions you have while I'm serving up an example here.
Perfect, perfect. For example, Lauren asked that she's heard that you should use present tense for current roles and past tense for previous roles. Is this true?
That is correct. Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you. And what's a little tricky sometimes the current job you will have a mix of both. And it's correct. Because some things you're currently working on, right, that are not completed yet, and other things will be completed, and then you'll need to use past tense. So I'm glad you asked that. As you can see, we have some yellow highlighted things here. And what I've highlighted is, if you think about a risk management executive, it's very hard for someone in this sort of a role to have accomplishments. They're not responsible for bringing in revenues. They're not responsible for processing transactions or getting the work delivered. They're trying to keep you from getting in trouble, right? But here's how you make a statement of accomplishment. He enhanced relationships. That's the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Reserve. Those are obviously the regulatory bodies for people in banking. And he reduced the number of matters requiring attention from 210 in 2003 to under 100 in 2005, and was awarded a pass on all exams. So if you work in the risk management field and you understand the regulatory environment, that would obviously be very meaningful to you, and that's a very nice accomplishment. He also, here in this, here's comprehensive, developed the first comprehensive corporate governance policy for the company's loan loss reserve, bringing transparency to the process and garnering praise from external constituents. So if you got a note from the CEO or from the outside regulatory, hey, you guys have done a bang-up job in improving your this and such, no reason we can't brag about it right here on the resume. We also have words like the entire organization. Here we have a comprehensive due diligence reviews, innovative, negotiated innovative brand covenants in the sale of asset management organization, blah, blah, blah. Spearheaded, excellent word here. What's interesting about this next section on this person's resume, and I've made a note here in the yellow, the wow factor here comes from the deal names and the specificity of the deal names. This is a remedial management. This is a workout. Well, most of us have heard of workout divisions at banks. Some of us have probably worked in them. Enron, that's pretty catchy, right? Everybody's heard of Enron, and like, wow, this guy worked on some of the Enron stuff. That's cool. We do actually have some accomplishments sort of built in here. Incentive clients to seek financing, negotiated, maximize recovery efforts on non-filed entities by pursuing enforcement action in certain jurisdictions. Okay, so re-engineered, established, introduced, performed extensive. This is how, some other ways that we present accomplishments. Uh-oh. Okay. Sometimes we have, okay, some don'ts. It's a waste of words on the page to talk about you were recruited to turn something around. You report to the CEO. This is mildly interesting, but the reader will ask you those things on the interview. The fact that you were recruited to turn something around or you were recruited to establish a sales force is not the interesting part. What's interesting is that you actually did it. And so we don't need to tell why you were recruited. We just tell the person what you actually did, and that does the job even better. There's a term in journalism, some of you may have heard of it, called bearing the lead. And that's where you have a really fabulous accomplishment, but it's buried into a great big paragraph of text. So we want to get those accomplishments up front and center where the reader can read them very quickly. Some people will try to repeat the same accomplishment in different places. It just makes a mess. It confuses the reader. It adds unnecessary length, and describing one accomplishment one time in describing it very well gets the job done much better. Be careful of jargon. If I've seen verticals one time, oh my goodness, enough about verticals. Make sure that whatever buzzwords or jargon that you use is relevant for your audience, and try not to use it otherwise. Likewise, the word global is so overused today. What's much more effective is to tell me that you opened an office in Mumbai, you opened the markets in South America, in Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Just much more effective to talk specifically about the things you've done in other countries and perhaps other languages that you speak, rather than just using the word global everywhere. Again, too much context, too much text, save it for the interview. And one thing I really don't like to do, sometimes people will pull an accomplishment out of the job section and try to put it up on top and create more of that on top verbiage. When you take an accomplishment out of the context of the job in which you perform it, it just loses all its power. It also can make the reader wonder if this was a recent accomplishment or a long time ago accomplishments. And of course they're looking for recent accomplishment is the more important thing. Sometimes you have a great big accomplishment that has a lot of parts and pieces to it. So this is a great big accomplishment. Led the launch of the company name's first commercial product, name of the product, approved by the FDA for some particular disease in some recent year. This is a huge, project, right? And it has different parts to it, such as strategic launch plan, building a cross-functional team, covering all of the other departments, development of promotional and educational plans and materials, product positioning, branding, naming, messaging, all of this stuff. And then we have some nice results. Reached $1 billion of net revenue by this time, one of the fastest biotech products to reach $1 billion in sales, achieved 75% market share versus competitive product launched at the same time by another firm. We have competitor there twice, which isn't too good. But this is a great way where you have a double-tiered bullet points. You don't want to have any more tiers. 2 is plenty. But as you can see, this is a really great way for a great big accomplishment. Some of you may be management consultants, and sometimes that can be very challenging, again, to describe your activities as accomplishments, because usually you're not there at the company to know how much the cost savings were or what the outcome was. And you certainly can't take credit for the outcome. You can take credit for what you installed, right? So one way to go about that is describe the type of client that you had. In this first example, for a public company in the enterprise appliance server market, very specific, as you can see, without naming the client, conducted a strategic assessment, proposed a restart, redirected the company to do thus and such. Now we do have a metric here, sold the vision to the board, and this project saved $15 million by dissuading them from moving into a credit, going into a product launch for a new market segment. This example here, $32 million, this is the size of the project actually, of a large-scale re-engineering project that this person led. And the client was a $1 billion document solution joint venture. Again, we're not naming the company. If you can name the company, that's very nice. But very often in management consulting, you really cannot. But important to note, led a team of 50 and transformed, that's a nice word, the finance, the supply chains, the sales and distribution of the company. We don't have actual results, but the scale and size and scope of what this job was presents very well. Just a little proper terminology. These are some of my pet peeves. First, let's just talk about what we call a resume. Some of you may be from other countries who will be listening to this broadcast. And if you're not in the United States, it's likely that in your country, your resume is called a CV. So by all means, call it a CV. As most of you probably know, that stands for Curriculum Vitae from the Latin. And call it a CV, that's perfectly fine with me. In the United States, a true CV is one of these 5, 10, 20-page documents used in academia. And it needs to be very long because you have all those publications and symposiums and all of the things that academics do. So what we're talking about here tonight, of course, are resumes that are used in the traditional corporate business world. And I don't care if you become a CEO, I don't care if you become a sitting board member or are a sitting board member, it's still a resume. No matter how senior you go, it's still a resume. So, sorry, I like to get that pet peeve off my chest. Now, a biography, I just wanted to show you briefly what I call a biography, and when you might use a biography. This is very much part of all of the personal branding. This is the biography. As you can see, it's a narrative. It would cover all the same information that you would find in a resume. There is a chronology to it, and we usually start with a nice big statement and then go into some background details. I chose to put dates. I like dates. I like transparency. Some people do not put dates in their biographies. So when would you use the bio as opposed to a resume? You use a bio when you're not looking for a job. If you had a speaking engagement, if perhaps you were vying to be an officer or a head of committee or something for a professional or a not-for-profit association. A biography is not used for a job search. It just doesn't get the job done. Conversely, a resume screams job search. So if you do not want to indicate that you're in job search, and you're using your resume for a speaking engagement, I would advise you to get a biography and then save your resume for when you're using it for something for a job. So what I recommend to make sure that you have the information ready is to keep a career file. This might be electronic, it might be a physical folder, or maybe one of each for different items that you have. But you want to collect metrics when you start an assignment. So what was the condition of the function, the department, the whatever, when you came into the job, compared then to 6 months, a year later, whatever the relevant metrics are. You can also use this file when performance review time is coming up. Many companies will ask you to write up, or bosses will ask you to write up your own accomplishments for the year. And if they don't, you should volunteer. And you go to your folder, pull out the accomplishments, write up your memo before performance review for your boss, and that's a great time then to update your resume at the same time, so that it's relatively ready to go. If you were to get a phone call from a recruiter, you could, within a day or so, polish it up and have it ready to go, rather than trying to create it from scratch. Okay, so we'll be into Q&A here in just a minute. I wanted to show you all that in addition to myself, we have 2 other highly qualified resume writers here at Ivy Exec. You can read the specific details of their backgrounds on your own later when you review. But as you can see, let's see, we've got MBAs, we've got Yahoo News, a lot of National Writers Association. We've got a lot of excellently credentialed individuals other than myself. As you may or may not know, Ivy Exec offers 2 levels of resume writing. The Exec, the Elite Package is the package that affords you a few more features and benefits. There is an email address here, resumes@ivexec.com, where you could email to schedule a 15-minute appointment to discuss your needs and what IVExec could do in working with you for your resume. And I like to end all of my presentations with, the road to success is always under construction. And that actually speaks very much to your resume. Your resume should always be a document under construction, under improvement, and continually changing to reflect your most recent accomplishments, minimize things in the past that are less relevant, and make sure that you're capturing all of that information as you go along. So I'm going to leave this slide up, and Mache, I assume we have a few more questions?
Yes, we do. We definitely have a lot of really good questions. So also, before I continue, we will definitely be sending the slide deck and also the recording of the webinar as well. So we'll send the link to that in a follow-up email. So don't worry, we'll do that definitely. Okay, so for example, we have a question from Jennifer. How would you recommend communicating financial accomplishments when due to privacy concerns? For example, company is not public, you're limited in what you can actually divulge.
Yeah. One way to get around that is to give a percentage improvement. You know, increase sales 20%. So we're not telling the reader what sales used to be or what sales are today, just that you increase them 20%. That's the best way to deal with that.
Perfect. Perfect. Also, Mark asked, where do you want to list your certifications? In the profile, job descriptions, or following the education section?
I do it different ways. Some people have licenses, right, or admitted to the bar in different states. You can create a separate section for licensure and professional training, or you can attach it to your education and certifications.
Perfect. Perfect. Also, Noelia asked, all my experience is outside the U.S. How can I convince my audience that I have experience to work in the U.S.?
You know, that's a good example of the resume can only do so much for you. You want to try to use words, you know, the jargon, the words that sound American. To be honest, it's very hard, and it's very unfortunate that American companies will tend to discount international experience, and people who've done the same thing in another country or part of the world that they're doing here. But there's a rather strong bias between domestic and international. So that's probably more of a career strategy and job search strategy than it is a resume.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, that's good to know too. Another question we have is from Thomas. How important is the scale of accomplishments in terms of money, employees, and is small a disadvantage?
Let me see if I understand the question. So if you work for a small company,
is that a disadvantage as well, or how important is the scale, I guess, of the accomplishments?
You know, it depends on what you're going for. You know, a lot of people leave a very large corporation and work for a startup or a joint venture that is smaller, and then might go back into a large corporate setting. So it is what it is. You put the numbers out there. Also, in a smaller company, again, it may be the percentage increase may be much more important than the absolute numbers.
Perfect. Perfect. Also, another question is, how much attention is paid to positions prior to 5 years back?
Most employers will put most of the emphasis on your most recent 5 years. If some of your, which is not to say you don't put the information from your prior jobs, it just gets shortened. But a lot depends on your objectives. I'm going to show real quick our John Doe here. we have this John Doe had 30 years of business experience, was in his 50s. And as you can see early in his career, we've just listed, as you can see, there's a plant management, supply chain, operations, plant sort of jobs, executive trainee. At this point in time, you know, he's a very big executive, quality assurance, VP global supply chain. The reader doesn't really need to know all of the information about these plants. Now, there may be other jobs where it is important for you to describe to the reader things that you did and accomplishments that you had going back a few years, because they serve as the platform or the basis upon which you've built your expertise or whatever. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but it is very often case, you know, situation specific as to how much detail you put on the earlier years.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, perfect. Also, we have another question. Do you customize the resume for each job? And also another one is, how does LinkedIn profile differ from a resume?
Okay, let me take the LinkedIn question first. One thing that's different about LinkedIn is that it has a almost unlimited, I'm sure it has some limit to it, that summary section is sort of invites you to put a rather long summary, much longer perhaps than you would put in your profile on your resume. It's a different medium, and people are more likely to be leisurely looking at your LinkedIn profile as opposed to looking at your resume in a stack of 50 others. So usually what happens is we take the profile information and expand upon it to create a more robust summary section. At the end of the day, what's nice about LinkedIn, it in essence serves as an online resume. And what I like to do, as I said, put the LinkedIn URL on the resume itself, but in your email signature, your personal one if you're in job search mode, not your business one, but in your personal email, you can take the URL from your LinkedIn profile and actually put it into your email, which encourages people to look you up, and it also avoids the endless debate or dilemma: should I or should I not attach my resume if I'm, you know, having a networking email? You know, will I look too aggressive as a job seeker, or will they want it, will they not want it? Well, if you put your LinkedIn URL right there in your email and your cover note, you know, for some outreach that you're making, then they can click on your LinkedIn profile, see what in essence is your resume and more. I do recommend, particularly if you're in job search mode, all of those wonderful accomplishments and bullet points, just copy and paste them over. You want a very robust, again, all the accomplishments should just come right over into the respective jobs sections for your LinkedIn profile. And Maciej, could you remind me, what was the first half of the question?
Of course. Actually, I'm looking right now. I can't actually find it already, but...
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll inquire again.
Okay. Another question we had was from Gaurav. What about hobbies and interests in the resume?
Great question. Some people are very big on them. I tend to forget about them. So for some types of jobs where the hobbies or interests are a great way to have an icebreaker, to start the conversation, potentially to make you an interesting person, you know, that you climb mountains or do something really interesting for conversation. It doesn't get you anything in terms of in the door. It doesn't get you in the queue for jobs any better than if you didn't have the interest. I think the reason it's used very often when you're coming out of business school, for example, is there's a lot of commoditization, if you will, of candidates, and also sometimes not a whole lot to talk about on the interview, and it creates a conversation opportunity and an opportunity to kind of personalize yourself. So to be honest, I'm sort of indifferent about it. Some hobbies maybe, you know, we can do. I had a client that wanted to put, he had kissed at the Taj Mahal, because apparently that's a really fun or interesting or special thing to do. But it was just too personal and inappropriate for a resume. And we had quite a debate about it. So I'm good with hobbies. I was good with him climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, but I wasn't good on the kissing at the Taj Mahal. Too personal.
Perfect, perfect. We also have a question from Alejandro, a follow-up on LinkedIn. Where in the resume do we put the LinkedIn URL?
To make it easy for the person to find you on LinkedIn, which sounds sort of silly because they've got your resume, right? It's part of transparency. It's part of making it easy. It's for the reader. They might want to connect with you. And if your name is Bill Smith or even Laura Hill, there are lots of Laura Hills in the world. And so if you didn't know my company name, or, let's just make it easy for people to find you on LinkedIn if they want to connect with you. And also, I mean, it's not special because everybody is on LinkedIn today, but it does sort of show to the reader that you're au courant, you're with it, you're up to date.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Also, if you have over 25 years of experience, do you list all the jobs with dates?
Oh, that's a great question, and I'm going to add to that question of should you or should you not take off your graduation years to disable the person from figuring out how old you are. In some cases, it is a good idea. Gosh, I wish I could give you a blanket answer. Sometimes it is good to lop off some early experience, particularly if it's just not relevant. If you changed careers back when or something. If you're really trying to make yourself look younger, it's probably not going to work very well. Because if your first job shows up as vice president, clearly you had some jobs before that. You didn't start your career at age 22 as a vice president, right? So, and to be honest, if the dates are missing from your graduation dates, if they're missing, that's an immediate red flag to the reader that this person thinks he or she is old and has taken the dates off, and therefore I have to assume the person's old. So you might as well just give me the dates, and because sometimes the dates make you younger than what I probably thought about you when I didn't see the dates. If your resume is going to retained search firms, Spencer Stewart, Heidrick & Struggles, Korn, Ferry, and I think many of our Ivy Exec clients are candidates for retained searches. You don't want to take off too much. The retained search people are expecting you to be fully credentialed and to be a veteran. They're not looking for 28-year-old whippersnappers to come in and be senior vice presidents. So they're expecting you to have a robust length of experience. So the answer is there's just no really good answer. And if you're trying to appear younger, be careful. If you leave the dates off of your graduation, it doesn't necessarily help you accomplish that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, perfect. And we will have time for maybe for a few more, maybe 2 or 3 more questions. But
sure.
But we don't want. I definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I'm here. I'm flooded with questions. So we will also we'll have members of our team reach out to you and follow up on the questions as well. So please, write all the questions in. We'll have people responding to them as well. So don't worry. But we definitely have plenty of questions.
Okay.
Which is fantastic. Actually, Jasmine asked, what are your thoughts on alternative formats such as displaying information in columns versus rows?
That's an easy one. Don't do it. For all the reasons I gave in the presentation. You want your dates, the places, the information to be in standard places to make it quick and easy for the reader to see it. Shading and columns and special formats it can just be annoying, and then you make the reader hunt for the information they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Actually, for example, Akshay asked, how important is it to put the career objective at the beginning of the resume?
Well, as we discussed a few minutes ago, objective statements are out of fashion, so we don't use objective statements. What we do are these profiles, and the question was, how important is it to have one? Is that the question, Mache?
Exactly. So how, I guess, what, I guess, importance should it have?
Okay. You know, again, if you are not changing directions in your career and you're doing the same thing, it's much less important, and you can actually leave it off. If you choose to use it, though, it does give some added positioning or information. And so if you're looking to change careers, it is very important to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Less so if you're not.
Perfect, perfect. This is a question that probably applies to a few people. What do you recommend for someone who has not been employed for the past 2 years, or has been self-employed, for example, for a while?
Well, it's employment. It's real, and you want to make an entry for it at the top. If, however, what you're really selling and what you're looking to do is get back to the corporate job you had before you were consulting or, you know, did something else, you want to make your most recent entry very, very short. And you do want to have an accomplishment. You want it to sound real, not like you just called yourself a consultant so it would sound like you were employed. You want to actually give, you know, consulted for a blah blah firm and help them do thus and such, or not help them, but develop their strategic plan. You want to give specifics so so it sounds credible. But then very quickly get to the jobs and the accomplishments of what you want the reader to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, perfect. Also, quite a few questions. Actually, so we had a few questions about how does the tips here apply to other types of resumes, for example, either nonprofit or legal areas. How do the tips you gave, I guess, translate or to those fields as well?
Great question. You know, a good resume is a good resume is a good resume. So I can't think of any exceptions to anything in the presentation tonight that I would offer as different for a not-for-profit resume. So, you know, if you're a teacher, I wrote a resume for a teacher once, and it's really not so much accomplishments oriented. I mean, you can't take credit for how smart your students are, or I guess you could take credit if you helped raise their SAT scores or whatever. But in the business world or in a professional role in a not-for-profit, if you think about it, even though it's a not-for-profit organization, it's a professional organization, right? And they would be hiring you because of this prior success you have had as an executive director or as a head of development or something like that. So I think the principles are really the same.
That's a very good answer. And with that, I mean, I would like to, thank you, Laura, so much for giving a fantastic presentation. We have so many questions as well, so thank you so much for giving a really good, engaging presentation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
So with that, I would just like to wish everybody a great night, and thank you so much for attending tonight's webinar.
Thank you, Mache. Good night, everyone.
All right. Take care. Good night.